Excuse me, but I think you're in the wrong section. Bianca Ashford's voice cut through the first-class cabin like a blade, dripping with the kind of entitlement that money couldn't buy but privilege certainly could. She stood in the aisle of Flight 447, her Hermes bag clutched against her cream-colored blazer, staring down at the black man occupying seat 2A, her seat, according to the boarding pass she waved like a weapon. The man looked up from his laptop, his dark eyes meeting hers with a calmness that only seemed to irritate Bianca more. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 40s, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. But Bianca Ashford didn't see the expensive cut of his clothes or the quiet confidence in his posture. She saw what she'd been conditioned to see her entire life. "I'm sorry." His voice was measured, professional, with just a hint of curiosity. "This is first class," Bianca said, speaking slower as if he might not understand. "Your ticket is probably for coach. The flight attendant can help you find your proper seat." A hush fell over the cabin. Other passengers turned to watch, their conversations dying mid-sentence. The flight attendant, a young woman named Maya, hurried over with the practiced smile of someone who'd dealt with difficult passengers before, but never quite like this. "Is everything all right here?" Maya asked, though her eyes had already taken in the scene. The black man's calm dignity, Bianca's aggressive stance, the other passengers' uncomfortable stares. "Yes, this gentleman seems confused about his seating assignment," Bianca said, not bothering to lower her voice. "I'm sure it's just a simple mistake." The man closed his laptop slowly, deliberately. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Bianca's chest tighten, though she couldn't understand why. "I'm Jaden Wellington. This is my seat." Bianca's laugh was sharp, brittle. "I don't think you understand. I'm Bianca Ashford, Ashford Industries. We're platinum members. There's obviously been some kind of mix-up." Jaden reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his boarding pass, handing it to Maya without breaking eye contact with Bianca. The flight attendant's face went pale as she read it. "Mrs. Ashford," Maya said carefully, "Mr. Wellington's boarding pass shows seat 2A. Perhaps if you could show me yours." Bianca snatched the pass from Maya's hands, her eyes scanning the details. 2A first class. But that was impossible. She was Bianca Ashford. She always sat in 2A. It was her seat, had been for years. Her father had made sure of that when he'd first started flying with Meridian Airlines decades ago. "There's been a mistake," Bianca insisted, but something in her voice had changed. "A crack in the armor," Maya said gently. "Your boarding pass shows seat 12B. The words hit Bianca like a physical blow. 12B middle seat. Economy. The humiliation burned through her chest, but it was nothing compared to the rage. How dare they? How dare this man, this stranger, sit in her seat, in her section, looking at her with those calm, knowing eyes? "I want to speak to your manager," Bianca demanded, her voice rising. "This is unacceptable. Do you know who I am? Do you know what my family has done for this airline?" Jaden stood slowly, his tall frame casting a shadow over Bianca. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the cabin. "I think you should take your assigned seat." The dismissal in his tone, polite, professional, but absolute, sent Bianca over the edge. In that moment, every frustration of her recent life crystallized into pure fury. Her divorce, her company's financial struggles, the whispers at the country club about the Ashford family's decline. And now this man, looking at her like she was nothing. "You don't get to tell me what to do," she hissed, stepping closer to Jaden. "I don't know how you got that seat, but I guarantee you don't belong here. People like you don't just get to. People like me." The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Bianca realized, too late, that every passenger in first class was now staring at her. Some had their phones out. The words she'd been about to say, the words that lived in the dark corners of her mind, fed by years of privilege and unexamined bias, died in her throat. But the damage was done. She could see it in Jaden's eyes, in Maya's shocked expression, in the way the other passengers leaned away from her as if her words were contagious. "Hey, my friend, hope you're doing well. Drop a comment and let me know how you're feeling about this story so far and where you are watching from. Some stories are too close to my heart to share on YouTube. I send those, along with little life lessons and surprises, to my email circle. If you'd like to be part of it, you can join with the link in the description." "Mrs. Ashford," Maya said, her professional composure cracking. "I need you to take your assigned seat immediately, or I'll have to call security." Bianca's world tilted. Security. Huh. She was Bianca Ashford. Her family had money, connections, power. She donated to charities. She voted for the right candidates. She wasn't a racist. She had a black cleaning lady who she was very kind to. But as she looked around the cabin, at the faces staring back at her with mixtures of disgust and disbelief, Bianca felt something she hadn't experienced in years, genuine shame. "This isn't over," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to Jaden, Maya, or herself. As she gathered her bags and walked the gauntlet toward economy, her heels clicking against the cabin floor like a countdown timer, Bianca caught sight of Jaden settling back into his seat. He'd already reopened his laptop, but she could see him watching her in the reflection of the window. What she couldn't see, what she wouldn't discover until it was far too late, was the email thread on his screen. The subject line read, "Final decision, Ashford Industries Partnership, $2.8 billion contract." The sender? Jaden Wellington, CEO, Meridian Airlines. As Bianca squeezed into the middle seat between a crying baby and a man who smelled like onions, she had no idea that in the span of 5 minutes, she'd just destroyed everything her family had spent 3 generations building. The plane hadn't even taken off, and Bianca Ashford's world was already crashing down. But she wouldn't know that yet. The real devastation was still to come. The economy section of Flight 447 felt like a prison designed specifically for Bianca Ashford's humiliation. Seat 12B pressed against her from all sides. The crying infant to her left belonged to a harried young mother who kept shooting apologetic glances, while the man to her right had apparently decided that deodorant was optional for air travel. Bianca pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, desperate to escape into the familiar territory of work emails and conference calls. But as the screen flickered to life, her blood ran cold. 17 missed calls from her assistant, Rebecca. 43 unread messages. And at the top of her notifications, a news alert that made her stomach drop. Ashford Industries stock plummets amid partnership speculation. "No, no, no," she whispered, frantically scrolling through Rebecca's increasingly panicked messages. "Mrs. Ashford, the board meeting moved up to 2 p.m. The Meridian deal is everything. We're down to our last quarter of operating capital. Father Sullivan called about the mortgage on the estate. Mrs. Ashford, where are you?" Bianca's carefully constructed world began to crumble as she read. The family estate in Martha's Vineyard, mortgaged. The company's charitable foundation, being investigated for financial irregularities that her ex-husband had hidden from her. Her personal accounts, frozen pending the divorce settlement. She wasn't just wealthy Bianca Ashford anymore. She was barely solvent Bianca Ashford, hanging onto her family's legacy by her perfectly manicured fingernails. The Meridian Airlines partnership wasn't just business. It was survival. 3 rows ahead in first class, Jaden Wellington was having his own moment of reckoning. The email from his head of partnerships, Regina Mills, had been waiting when he'd reopened his laptop. Jaden, Ashford Industries presentation moved to today. Board wants final decision before market close. Their financials are worse than we thought. Single point of failure company. Recommend proceeding with extreme caution. S. Jaden rubbed his temples, remembering the conversation that had brought him to this flight in the first place. 6 months ago, Ashford Industries had been their top choice for the massive infrastructure partnership, a deal that would modernize airports across the eastern seaboard. Bianca's great-grandfather had built half the private terminals Meridian still used. Her father had been one of their first major investors. But the company was bleeding money, and the Ashford family's reputation was built more on legacy than current competence. Still, Jaden believed in second chances. He'd needed plenty himself. Growing up in Detroit, the son of a laid-off auto worker and a night shift nurse, Jaden had learned early that the world would try to put him in a box. Too black for the white corporate spaces, too ambitious for the neighborhood he'd come from. When he'd started as a baggage handler at 19, working his way through business school one night class at a time, nobody expected him to last 6 months. 23 years later, he was running the company. But success hadn't insulated him from moments like the one he'd just experienced. Bianca Ashford's assumptions, her casual dismissal of his presence in first class, the way she'd looked through him rather than at him. It was a reminder that for all his achievements, some people would never see past his skin color. The irony wasn't lost on him that the woman who'd just tried to humiliate him was also the face of the company begging for his partnership. "Mr. Wellington." Maya appeared beside his seat, her earlier professional composure replaced by genuine concern. "I wanted to apologize again for what happened. That was completely unacceptable." Jaden looked up from his laptop. Maya was young, maybe 25, with kind eyes and a name tag that indicated she'd been with Meridian for only 6 months. It's not your fault, Maya. But I appreciate you handling it professionally. I've never seen anything like that, she said quietly, glancing around to make sure other passengers weren't listening. I mean, I've dealt with difficult passengers before, but the way she looked at you. Maya shook her head. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the old days, when she couldn't even fly on planes like this. I thought we were past all that. Jaden felt something twist in his chest. Maya's grandmother. How many generations would it take before scenes like today became truly unthinkable? We're getting there, he said gently. Slowly, but we're getting there. What Jaden didn't tell Maya was that he'd been recording the interaction on his phone. Not for revenge, but for documentation. In his position, he'd learned that truth was a weapon that cut both ways. It could destroy, but it could also teach. Meanwhile, in economy, Bianca was discovering that her humiliation was just beginning. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter, Pearl, a sophomore at Columbia. Mom, are you okay? Someone posted a video. Bianca's blood turned to ice. Video? What video? She clicked on the link Pearl had sent, and her worst nightmare materialized on her phone screen. Someone had filmed the entire confrontation. The video was shaky, clearly shot from a few rows back, but the audio was crystal clear. Her voice, sharp and entitled. This is first class. Your ticket is probably for coach. People like you don't just get to. The video cut off before she'd finished the sentence, but the implication hung in the digital air like a toxic cloud. The poster had captioned it, Karen goes full racist in first class, white woman tries to remove black man from his seat. 200 shares. 500 comments. The numbers were climbing by the second. Bianca's hands shook as she scrolled through the responses. This is exactly what's wrong with America. Somebody identify this woman. Fire her from whatever job she has. Peak white privilege on display. But it was the comment from @MarketWatch_Jenny that made Bianca's world stop spinning. Plot twist, that's Jaden Wellington, CEO of Meridian Airlines. Lady just tried to kick her own potential business partner out of first class. This is about to get interesting. The phone slipped from Bianca's nerveless fingers, clattering to the cabin floor. The baby next to her stopped crying, as if sensing the shift in the universe's balance. Jaden Wellington, CEO. The man whose partnership could save her company, whose signature on a contract could preserve her family's legacy. The man she'd just publicly humiliated based on nothing more than the color of his skin. Bianca closed her eyes and felt her world tilt off its axis. Every assumption she'd made, every entitled word she'd spoken, every moment of unconscious bias that had led to this catastrophe played back in her mind like a highlight reel of her own destruction. She thought about her father, who'd built Ashford Industries from nothing after immigrating from Ireland. He'd faced his own discrimination, his own struggles to be taken seriously in boardrooms full of men who'd inherited their positions. She thought about her ex-husband, whose betrayal had left her scrambling to hold together a company she'd never really learned to run. She thought about Pearl, who'd spent her teenage years volunteering at homeless shelters and calling out casual racism at family dinners while Bianca had dismissed it as youthful idealism. And she thought about Jaden Wellington, sitting 3 rows ahead, probably watching his own phone as her life imploded in real time. The worst part wasn't the humiliation. It wasn't even the financial ruin that was now inevitable. The worst part was the growing realization that she'd earned every consequence coming her way. As Flight 447 climbed toward cruising altitude, Bianca Ashford began to understand that she wasn't just facing the loss of a business deal. She was facing the loss of everything she'd thought she was. And somewhere in first class, Jaden Wellington was making a decision that would change both their lives forever. The plane's descent into Chicago felt like a countdown to Bianca's execution. As the wheels touched the tarmac, her phone exploded with notifications, a digital avalanche that buried any hope of containing the damage. The video had gone viral. 2 million views. Trending on 3 platforms. Karen vs Meridian CEO was climbing the charts faster than Bianca's blood pressure. But it was the call from board member Richard Patterson that delivered the final blow. Bianca, where the hell are you? Richard's voice crackled through her earpiece, barely contained fury radiating through the connection. The emergency board meeting is in 1 hour. The Meridian presentation was supposed to be this afternoon, but their team just cancelled. Permanently. Bianca felt the blood drain from her face. Richard, I can explain. Explain what? That you publicly humiliated the CEO of the only company that can save us? That there's a video of you acting like some country club bigot circulating the internet? Bianca, we're done. The company is done. The line went dead, leaving Bianca staring at her phone as passengers filed past her toward the exit. She remained frozen in her middle seat, paralyzed by the magnitude of what she'd destroyed. You need to deplane. The flight attendant's voice was gentle but firm. Bianca looked up to see Maya standing in the aisle, her expression a mixture of professional courtesy and barely concealed pity. Behind her, the economy section had mostly emptied, leaving Bianca alone with her shame. Maya, Bianca said quietly. The man in 2A, Jaden Wellington, is he really? The CEO of Meridian Airlines? Yes, has been for 3 years now. Maya paused, then added with careful precision. He's actually the reason I have this job. Meridian's diversity initiative gave me a scholarship for flight training when my family couldn't afford it. The words hit Bianca like physical blows. Not only had she humiliated Jaden, she'd done it in front of someone whose life he'd directly improved. As Bianca finally gathered her belongings and walked through the now empty first-class section, she saw Jaden at the gate, surrounded by Meridian executives who'd been waiting for his arrival. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in their body language, the way they clustered around him like a protective wall. One of them, a sharp-looking Asian woman in an impeccable suit, was showing Jaden something on her tablet. His expression darkened as he read, and for a moment, his carefully controlled composure cracked. Bianca forced herself to keep walking, but as she passed near their group, she caught fragments of their conversation. Stock price is already reacting. Board wants immediate statement. Legal recommends complete separation from Ashford Industries. The woman with the tablet looked up and noticed Bianca hovering nearby. Jaden, she said quietly, isn't that? Jaden turned, and for the second time that day, his eyes met Bianca's. But this time, she saw something different in his gaze. Not anger, she could have handled anger. Instead, she saw disappointment so profound it made her chest ache. Mrs. Ashford, he said, his voice professionally neutral but somehow devastating in its formality. Bianca stepped forward, acutely aware that every person in the gate area was now staring at them. Some had their phones out, ready to capture the sequel to her viral humiliation. Mr. Wellington, she began, then stopped. What could she possibly say? How do you apologize for reducing someone to a stereotype? How do you take back words that revealed the ugliness you'd been carrying inside without even knowing it? You what? The question came from the woman with the tablet, Regina Mills, according to her name badge. Her voice carried a protective edge that suggested she'd witnessed too many moments like this. Bianca looked at Regina, then back at Jaden. I need to speak with you. About the partnership. About what happened on the plane. About. She took a shuddering breath. About how wrong I was. Jaden studied her for a long moment. Bianca could see him weighing options, calculating risks, considering the dozen different ways this conversation could go. Regina, he said finally, give us 5 minutes. Regina looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Jaden's tone stopped her. I'll be right over there, she said, pointing to a cluster of chairs 20 feet away. 5 minutes. As his team reluctantly moved away, Jaden gestured to an empty gate area nearby. After you. Bianca walked on unsteady legs to the designated space, hyper-aware of the phone cameras still trained on them from across the concourse. When they were as alone as they could be in an airport, Jaden turned to face her. You have 4 minutes, he said quietly. Bianca had rehearsed this moment during the eternal descent into Chicago, but now, faced with Jaden's steady gaze, every prepared word vanished. I destroyed my company today, she said instead, the words tumbling out raw and unfiltered. 93 years of my family's work, gone because I couldn't see past. She gestured helplessly. Past my own ignorance. Jaden waited, saying nothing. But that's not the worst part, Bianca continued, surprised by her own honesty. The worst part is that I probably would have done the same thing to you last week, or last month, or last year. This isn't about having a bad day or being stressed about business. This is about who I apparently am when no one's watching. She pulled out her phone and showed him the video that had ruined her life. Do you want to know what I see when I watch this? I see my father, who built this company from nothing after coming here from Ireland. He faced discrimination too, but somehow, I forgot that. I see my daughter, who spent years trying to teach me about privilege and bias while I nodded along and changed nothing. And I see you, a a successful businessman in a first-class seat that you earned, and I see. What? Jaden asked, his voice softer now. What do you see? Bianca met his eyes, and for the first time in years, she told the complete truth. I see everything that's wrong with me. The silence stretched between them, filled with the ambient noise of the airport, announcements, conversations, the distant hum of jet engines. Bianca could feel her life hanging in the balance, suspended on this moment, this conversation, this man's decision about who she might be beyond her worst moment. Mrs. Ashford, Jaden said finally, do you know why I was on that flight today? Bianca shook her head. I was coming to Chicago to personally deliver our decision about the Ashford Industries partnership. 3 months of negotiations, financial reviews, site visits. Your presentation was scheduled for this afternoon. The words hit Bianca like ice water. He'd been coming to give them the contract. The partnership that could have saved everything. He'd been bringing it to them. She whispered. Jaden's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and Bianca caught a glimpse of the screen. Dozens of missed calls, text messages, email notifications. The business world was reacting in real time to their viral confrontation. My board is meeting in emergency session, Jaden said, pocketing the phone. The recommendation will be to immediately terminate all discussions with Ashford Industries. Cut all ties, protect the Meridian brand, move on to the next option. Bianca felt the last of her hope crumble. And you agree with that recommendation? Jaden looked at her for a long moment, and Bianca saw something shifting in his expression. A crack in the professional armor, a glimpse of the man behind the CEO title. Mrs. Ashford, I've spent my entire career proving that people's first impressions of me are wrong. That the kid from Detroit who started in the baggage claim could run an airline. That skin color doesn't determine competence, or worth, or belonging. He paused, and Bianca could see him making a decision that would ripple far beyond their conversation. What happened on that plane? It happens to me more than you might think. Usually more subtly. A second look at my credit card. A request for additional identification. Assumptions about how I afford my lifestyle. But it still happens. Bianca's chest tightened with shame. However, Jaden continued, I've also learned that people can change. That sometimes our worst moments can become catalysts for our best transformations. He held out his hand, and Bianca saw that he was offering her his business card. Mrs. Ashford, you have 24 hours. 24 hours for what? Jaden's smile was small but genuine. To prove that this morning was your worst moment, not your truest one. My assistant will send you the details of let's call it an alternative presentation opportunity. Bianca took the card with trembling fingers. Why would you give me another chance? Because someone once gave me one, Jaden said simply. And because I think your daughter might be onto something about your capacity for change. Before Bianca could ask what he meant, Jaden was walking back toward his team. She watched him go, her mind reeling with confusion, hope, and terror in equal measure. As she stood alone in the gate area, her phone rang. Pearl's number. Mom, I saw the video. Are you okay? Bianca looked down at Jaden's business card, then at the viral video still playing on phones across the terminal, then at the wreckage of her life scattered around her like debris from a plane crash. No, sweetheart, she said honestly. But I think I might be about to be. What Bianca didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Jaden's alternative presentation opportunity would require her to do something that would either save her company and transform her life, or destroy what little remained of both. The choice would be entirely hers. But first, she'd have to survive the next 24 hours. The 24-hour countdown began the moment Bianca's Uber pulled away from O'Hare Airport. By the time she reached downtown Chicago, her phone had become a weapon of mass destruction, each notification delivering another blow to what remained of her reputation. The Ashford Industries building stood like a monument to her family's legacy, 4 to 7 stories of glass and steel reaching toward a sky that seemed to be falling. But as Bianca's heels clicked across the marble lobby, she noticed the differences that marked her company's decline. The empty reception desk, the flickering light in the company logo, the way the security guard avoided her eyes. Mrs. Ashford, her assistant Rebecca rushed to meet her at the elevator, her usually perfect composure cracked with panic. Thank God you're here. The board meeting, it's been a disaster. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending to her own execution. Rebecca briefed her in rapid, breathless sentences that painted a picture of total catastrophe. The video hit 3 million views. LinkedIn pulled your verified status. The charity gala committee asked you to step down. Your college called about the endowment naming rights. And Richard Patterson. Rebecca's voice dropped to a whisper. His calling for an immediate vote of no confidence. Bianca closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 4 generations of Ashford ambition pressing down on her shoulders. When the elevator doors opened, she was greeted by the sight of her entire board of directors filing out of the conference room, their faces ranging from disappointed to disgusted. Richard Patterson, her father's oldest business partner and the man who'd taught her to drive stick shift in the company parking lot, stopped directly in front of her. "Bianca," he said, his voice heavy with a sadness that cut deeper than anger, "we've made our decision." "Richard, please, if you'll just give me a chance to explain." "Explain what? That you've cost us the only contract that could save this company? That you've made us a laughingstock? That you've destroyed everything your father built because you couldn't keep your prejudices to yourself?" The words hit like physical blows, but it was the pain in Richard's eyes that nearly brought Bianca to her knees. This man had bounced her on his knee as a child, had walked her down the aisle when her father couldn't. "The board has voted," Richard continued. "You have 48 hours to find a solution, or we're moving forward with bankruptcy proceedings. I'm sorry, Bianca. We can't afford to go down with this ship." As the board members filed past her into the elevator, Bianca caught fragments of their whispered conversations. "Liability, irreparable damage, cut our losses." When the elevator doors closed, she was left alone in the hallway with Rebecca, whose loyalty was becoming increasingly expensive. "Mrs. Ashford," Rebecca said gently, "there's something else." Pearl called. "She's flying in from New York tonight." Bianca's heart clenched. Pearl was supposed to be studying for finals, not cleaning up her mother's messes. "Did you tell her not to come?" "I tried," she said, and I quote, "My mother needs me, and unlike some people, I don't abandon family when things get difficult." The implicit criticism stung because it was accurate. Bianca had spent years being too busy for family dinners, too important for school events, too focused on maintaining the family empire to actually connect with the family that gave it meaning. In her office, Bianca stared at Jaden Wellington's business card, turning it over in her hands like a talisman. The simple white cardstock held her only hope, but she had no idea what he wanted from her. Her computer chimed with an email from an address she didn't recognize, wellington.assistant@meridian.airlines. Asterisk Mrs. Ashford. Per Mr. Wellington's instructions, your presentation opportunity has been scheduled for tomorrow at 3 p.m. Location details attached. Please come alone. Note, this is not a traditional business presentation. Dress appropriately for community service. Regards, Jennifer Morrison, Executive Assistant to CEO *. Bianca stared at the screen, her confusion deepening. Community service. The attached address was for a location on the south side of Chicago, nowhere near Meridian's headquarters. She spent the next 6 hours researching everything she could find about Jaden Wellington, desperate for clues about what he might want from her. The official biography was impressive but standard. Detroit native, worked his way up from entry-level positions, Harvard MBA, rapid rise through airline management. But it was the personal details, buried in industry magazine profiles and community newsletter mentions, that began to paint a different picture. Jaden Wellington wasn't just a CEO. He was a man who'd used his success to lift others. The scholarship program Maya had mentioned was just the beginning. Jaden had quietly funded after-school programs in Detroit, mentored dozens of young professionals, and personally intervened when employees faced discrimination. There were photos of him at community centers, speaking at high schools, presenting awards to students who reminded Bianca of her younger self, ambitious, hungry, and fighting against the assumption that they didn't belong. As evening settled over Chicago, Bianca found herself staring out her office window at the city lights, wondering if tomorrow would be her last day as CEO of the company her great-grandfather had built. Her phone rang. "Pearl. Mom, I'm at the airport. Don't even think about telling me not to come." Bianca smiled despite everything. "I wouldn't dream of it, sweetheart." "Good. Because we need to talk. About today, about the company, about some things you apparently don't know about yourself." "What do you mean?" Pearl's voice carried a mixture of love and exasperation that Bianca recognized from every mother-daughter conversation since Pearl had turned 16. "Mom, do you remember what you told me when I got into Columbia?" Bianca frowned, trying to recall the moment. "That I was proud of you. You said that success without character is just expensive failure. That the Ashford name meant something because every generation had to earn it again." Pearl paused. I've been waiting my whole life for you to remember that. The words hit Bianca like a revelation. Her father had said something similar on his deathbed, that the company was just buildings and bank accounts without the values that gave it purpose. Pearl, I think I'm about to lose everything. Maybe, Pearl said gently. Or maybe you're about to find it. I'll see you in 2 hours. After Pearl hung up, Bianca sat alone in her office, surrounded by portraits of previous Ashford leaders. Her great-grandfather, who'd built the company during the Depression. Her grandfather, who'd integrated their workforce decades before it was legally required. Her father, who'd insisted that business success meant nothing if it came at the cost of human dignity. Somehow, despite their examples, she'd lost her way. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Tomorrow will require courage. But courage isn't the absence of fear, it's action in spite of fear. See you at 3. MW. Bianca stared at the message, her heart rate picking up. There was something in those words, something that suggested Jaden Wellington saw something in her that she'd lost sight of herself. As she prepared to leave the office, possibly for the last time as CEO, Bianca made a decision that surprised her. Instead of going home to her empty penthouse, she drove to the south side address Jaden had sent her. The community center sat on a corner lot surrounded by residential streets that had seen better decades. Even in the evening darkness, Bianca could see the building's potential, a converted school with good bones and a worn but welcoming facade. She parked across the street and sat in her car, watching people come and go. Families with children. Elderly couples walking slowly but purposefully. Teenagers in groups, laughing and talking with the kind of energy that Bianca remembered from her own youth. A man emerged from the building, tall, familiar silhouette that made Bianca's breath catch. Jaden Wellington, but not the polished CEO from the airport. This Jaden wore jeans and a sweater, carried a box of what looked like supplies, and moved with the easy comfort of someone who belonged in this space. He was followed by a group of children, maybe 8 or 9 years old, who clustered around him like he was a combination of superhero and favorite uncle. Bianca watched him kneel down to their level, listening to something one of the girls was telling him with the kind of focused attention she'd never seen him give in any business context. When he looked up, his eyes found her car across the street. Even from a distance, Bianca could see his surprise shift into something that might have been understanding. He said something to the children, who scattered toward waiting parents, then walked across the street to Bianca's car. She rolled down the window, feeling suddenly foolish for having come. Doing reconnaissance, Mrs. Ashford. I wanted to understand, she said simply. What are you asking me to do tomorrow? Jaden leaned against her car, and Bianca caught a scent that was completely different from his professional cologne. Something warm and real, like sawdust and children's chalk. And what do you think I'm asking? Bianca looked at the community center, at the warm lights in the windows, at the sign that read Wellington Youth Development Center in modest lettering. I think, she said slowly, you're asking me to remember who I used to be before I became who I am. Jaden smiled, and for the first time since their confrontation on the plane, Bianca saw something other than disappointment in his eyes. Close, he said. But tomorrow isn't about who you used to be. It's about who you choose to become. He pushed off from her car and started walking back toward the center, then turned around. Mrs. Ashford, bring work clothes. And maybe bring Pearl. I have a feeling she's been waiting for this conversation as long as I have. As Jaden disappeared back into the building, Bianca sat in her car, her mind racing. She thought about the board's ultimatum, about the viral video that had destroyed her reputation, about the company that might not survive the week. But mostly, she thought about the way Jaden had looked at those children, and the way he'd looked at her just now, not like a business adversary or a racist who'd humiliated him, but like someone who still had the potential to surprise him. For the first time in 24 hours, Bianca Ashford felt something other than dread. She felt possibility. Tomorrow would either destroy her completely or transform her into someone she'd forgotten she could be. She was no longer sure which outcome terrified her more. Pearl Ashford stood in the doorway of her mother's penthouse apartment like an avenging angel, her dark hair windswept from the Chicago evening and her eyes carrying a weight that made Bianca's chest tighten with dread. Hi, Mom, Pearl said quietly, setting down her overnight bag. We need to talk. Bianca had spent the drive home from Jaden's community center rehearsing what she would say to her daughter, explanations, justifications, promises about how she would fix this. But the tone in Pearl's voice suggested that this conversation would be nothing like what Bianca had prepared for. Sweetheart, I know how this looks, but do you? Pearl's question was soft but sharp as a blade. Because I don't think you understand how this looks at all. Bianca watched her daughter move through the apartment with the careful control of someone holding back an explosion. Pearl had always been like this, thoughtful, deliberate, devastating when she finally chose to speak her truth. Pearl, what happened on that plane was wrong. I know that. I'm going to make it right. Which time, Mom? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Bianca felt her world shift, the way it had on the plane, the way it had at the airport, the way it seemed to be doing every few hours as her life revealed new layers of destruction. What do you mean? Pearl turned to face her mother, and Bianca saw something in her daughter's expression that she'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, but a kind of weary recognition that suggested this conversation had been building for years. I mean, which time are you going to make right? The time you called security on the black delivery driver because you didn't believe he belonged in our building? The time you complained to the manager at that restaurant in Martha's Vineyard because the server had an accent? The time you told Mrs. Rodriguez that she couldn't possibly be a doctor because you assumed she was there to clean the office? Each example hit Bianca like a physical blow. She remembered each incident, but in her memory, they'd been reasonable responses to unusual situations. Hadn't they? Pearl, those were different. Were they? Pearl's voice rose for the first time. Mom, I've been watching you my entire life. Do you know what it was like to grow up as your daughter? To love you and admire you and want to be like you, while also having to apologize for you. Bianca sank onto her sofa, the weight of Pearl's words pressing down on her like a physical force. You remember when I was 16 and I brought Jaden home for the charity gala planning meeting? Bianca's blood turned to ice. Jaden Rodriguez. My friend from the volunteer program. You took one look at him and decided he was there to bust tables. You handed him a tray and told him the kitchen was through the back door. Pearl's voice was steady, but Bianca could see tears gathering in her eyes. I was so humiliated I couldn't speak. Jaden just smiled and said it was okay, that it happened to him a lot. The memory crashed over Bianca like a wave. The charity gala 3 years ago. The young man in the nice suit who'd seemed out of place among the other volunteers. She'd made an assumption, acted on it, never thought about it again. But Pearl had thought about it. Pearl had been carrying that shame for 3 years. Oh God, Bianca whispered. Pearl, I didn't. I don't remember it that way. Of course you don't. You never do. Pearl sat down across from her mother, and Bianca could see the little girl who used to curl up in her lap for bedtime stories warring with the woman who was finally speaking her truth. Mom, do you want to know why I really went to Colombia? Why I chose to study social justice? Why I spend my weekends at homeless shelters and my summers working with immigrant families? Bianca nodded, afraid to speak. Because I was terrified of becoming you. The words landed like a physical blow, stealing Bianca's breath. Pearl continued, her voice breaking slightly. Not the successful you. Not the brilliant businesswoman you. Not even the generous with charity you. I was terrified of becoming the woman who sees people and makes assumptions based on how they look, where they come from, what they sound like. The woman who's so wrapped up in her own privilege that she doesn't even notice when she hurts people. Bianca felt something crumbling inside her chest, not just her pride or her self-image, but something deeper. The foundation of who she'd believed herself to be. Pearl, I love you. Everything I've done has been to build something for you, for our family. I know you love me, Mom. That's what makes this so hard. Pearl wiped her eyes. But love isn't enough if it doesn't change how you treat other people. Bianca's phone buzzed with a text message. She ignored it, but Pearl glanced at the screen. It's from Jaden Wellington, Pearl said, her voice changing. Mom, who is Jaden Wellington? Bianca felt the last of her composure cracking. He's the CEO of Meridian Airlines. The man from the plane. The man whose partnership could save our company. Pearl's eyes widened as she put the pieces together. The man you humiliated on video is the same man who could save Ashford Industries. Yes. And he's giving you another chance. Yes. Tomorrow afternoon. I don't know what he wants from me, but it's my only option. Pearl stared at her mother for a long moment, then picked up Bianca's phone and read the message. He wants you to bring me, Pearl said quietly. Why would he want me there? Bianca felt a new kind of dread building in her chest. I don't know. But even as she said it, Bianca was beginning to suspect that Jaden Wellington knew exactly who Pearl was, and that tomorrow's test would be far more personal than she'd imagined. Pearl stood up and walked to the window overlooking the lake, her silhouette outlined against the city lights. Mom, can I ask you something? Anything. When you see me, what do you see? The question caught Bianca off guard. I see my daughter. I see someone brilliant and compassionate and strong. I see the best parts of your father and me, but better. Pearl turned around, and Bianca was surprised to see that she was crying. When I look in the mirror, I see someone who carries your DNA and your privilege and your last name. And I see someone who has to work twice as hard to prove that she's not you. The words hit Bianca like a sledgehammer. Pearl. No, let me finish. Because tomorrow, when you go to meet Jaden Wellington, you need to understand something. This isn't just about a business deal. This isn't just about saving the company. This is about whether you're going to spend the rest of your life being the kind of person your daughter is ashamed to be related to. Pearl gathered her things and headed toward the guest room, then stopped at the doorway. I love you, Mom. But I'm not going to keep apologizing for you. Tomorrow, you decide who you really are. And I'll decide whether I can live with that person. As Pearl's door closed, Bianca sat alone in her living room, surrounded by the material evidence of her success, original artwork, imported furniture, a view that cost more per month than most people's salaries. But for the first time in her life, she felt truly poor. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Jaden Wellington, tomorrow at 3 p.m. Bring Pearl. And Mrs. Ashford. Bring the truth. All of it. Bianca stared at the message, her mind racing. How much did Jaden know about her past? About Pearl's experiences? About the pattern of behavior that her daughter had just laid bare? She thought about the young man Pearl had mentioned, Jaden Rodriguez. The name resonated with something, some half-remembered detail from business dealings or social connections. With growing dread, Bianca opened her laptop and began searching. What she found made her stomach drop to her feet. Jaden Rodriguez. Scholarship recipient, Wellington Youth Development Program. Current Harvard Business School student. Summer internship with Meridian Airlines. The photo showed a young man with Pearl's eyes and Jaden Wellington's smile, standing between them at what appeared to be a graduation ceremony. Bianca's hands shook as she read the caption. Jaden Wellington presents scholarship award to Jaden Rodriguez, named in honor of Wellington's father. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Jaden Wellington hadn't given her a second chance out of generosity or business pragmatism. He'd given her a second chance because he knew exactly who she was and what she'd done to people he cared about. Tomorrow wasn't a business presentation. It was a reckoning. And Bianca was beginning to understand that she might not survive it with anything resembling her old life intact. But as she sat in her empty penthouse, listening to the sound of her daughter crying through the bedroom wall, Bianca realized that maybe her old life wasn't worth saving. Maybe it was time to find out who she could become when everything she'd built on lies and privilege finally crumbled away. The question was whether she had the courage to find out. Bianca Ashford didn't sleep. She spent the night in her home office, surrounded by laptops and legal documents, watching her life disintegrate in real time across multiple screens. The viral video had evolved beyond social media mockery into something far more destructive. Financial news networks were running segments on the Ashford incident as a case study in corporate liability. Stock analysts were recommending investors avoid any exposure to Ashford Industries pending leadership resolution. Her company's credit rating had been downgraded twice in 12 hours. But it was the investigative journalism that cut deepest. A reporter from the Chicago Tribune had dug into Bianca's past, interviewing former employees, business partners, and community members. The article, published at 3 a.m. with the headline A Pattern of Privilege, The Bianca Ashford Files, read like an indictment of everything she'd thought she was. There was Mrs. Mills, the brilliant engineer Bianca had passed over for promotion 3 times, assuming she was too quiet for leadership. The article included copies of Mrs. Mills's performance reviews, consistently outstanding, and her resignation letter, citing cultural barriers to advancement. There was Sidney Martinez, the facilities manager Bianca had accused of theft when expensive equipment went missing, despite security footage later revealing the items had been mistakenly shipped to the wrong floor. Sidney had been fired immediately. The equipment manufacturer had sent an apology. Bianca had never followed up. There was Jennifer Brooks, the black marketing executive Bianca had introduced to clients as her diversity hire, never realizing how those words undermined Jennifer's credibility and expertise. Jennifer had left to start her own agency, which now competed directly with Ashford Industries for clients. The list went on. Incident after incident that Bianca had forgotten or rationalized, but that had shaped other people's careers, lives, and perceptions of their own worth. At 5 a.m., Bianca's doorbell rang. She expected Pearl, returning early from whatever late-night sanctuary she'd found. Instead, she opened the door to find Rebecca, her assistant, holding 2 coffee cups and wearing an expression Bianca had never seen before. "We need to talk," Rebecca said, walking past Bianca into the apartment without invitation. Bianca followed her to the living room, accepting the coffee with hands that shook slightly. Rebecca sat across from her, no longer the deferential assistant but a woman with something important to say. "Rebecca, if this is about your resignation." "It's not." Rebecca's voice was steady, but Bianca could see the effort it took. "Mrs. Ashford, how long have I worked for you?" 7 years. 7 years. Do you know what my job description says?" Bianca frowned. "Executive assistant. Scheduling, correspondence, travel arrangements. Project management, client relations, contract negotiation support, crisis management, and strategic planning assistance," Rebecca corrected. "But on my business cards, what does it say?" Bianca felt a familiar dread building. Executive assistant. Do you know why? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Bianca thought about the countless meetings where Rebecca had provided insights that Bianca had later presented as her own. The client relationships Rebecca had maintained. The problems Rebecca had solved that never made it to Bianca's attention. "Because that's what I hired you as," Bianca said weakly. "Because you couldn't imagine that a 24-year-old black woman from the South Side could be anything more than an assistant, no matter what she was actually doing." Rebecca's voice remained calm, but Bianca could see tears gathering in her eyes. "Mrs. Ashford, I have an MBA from Northwestern. I speak 3 languages. I've been running half this company for 3 years, and you've never once considered promoting me or even acknowledging what I actually do." Bianca felt the room tilting around her. "Rebecca, I didn't realize." "Of course you didn't. Because you see what you expect to see." Rebecca pulled out her phone and showed Bianca the LinkedIn page that had been haunting her nightmares. "Do you know what this is?" It was a job posting. Senior Vice President, Strategic Operations. At Meridian Airlines. "I applied yesterday," Rebecca said quietly. "Jaden Wellington's office called me this morning. They are flying me to Detroit for an interview tomorrow." The betrayal hit Bianca like a physical blow. "You're leaving? Now? When everything is falling apart?" "Mrs. Ashford, I've been trying to leave for 2 years. But I stayed because I hoped that eventually you'd see me. Really see me. Not just what you expected me to be." Rebecca stood up, smoothing her skirt with hands that trembled slightly. "I'm not quitting to hurt you. I'm quitting to save myself. Because if I stay here any longer, I'm going to start believing that this is all I'm worth." As Rebecca reached the door, she turned back one final time. "The meeting today. At the community center. Mrs. Ashford, Jaden Wellington isn't testing whether you can change. He's testing whether you deserve the chance to try." After Rebecca left, Bianca sat alone in her apartment as the sun rose over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that mocked the darkness in her chest. Her phone rang. "Richard Patterson." "Bianca, I'm calling as a friend, not as a board member." His voice carried a weariness that made Bianca's heart ache. "Don't go to that meeting today." "Richard, it's my only chance." "It's not a chance, sweetheart. It's an execution." Richard's voice was gentle but firm. "I've been making calls. Jaden Wellington isn't planning to save your company. He's planning to destroy it." Bianca felt her blood run cold. "What do you mean?" "Think about it, Bianca. You humiliated him publicly. You revealed yourself to be exactly the kind of person his entire career has been dedicated to proving wrong. Why would he help you?" Richard paused, and Bianca could hear the decades of friendship and business partnership in his next words. "He's going to offer you a deal today. Something that sounds like salvation but is actually designed to expose you even further. He's going to make you choose between saving yourself and doing what's right. And either choice will destroy you. Then what am I supposed to do? Cut your losses. File for bankruptcy protection. Sell the assets. You can start over somewhere else, maybe under a different name. But don't walk into that room today. Because whatever Jaden Wellington has planned, you won't survive it." After Richard hung up, Bianca walked to her window and stared out at the city she'd grown up in. Somewhere out there, Jaden Wellington was preparing for their meeting. Somewhere out there, Pearl was deciding whether her mother was worth saving. Somewhere out there, Rebecca was preparing for a new life at a company that would value her contributions. And somewhere out there, Jaden Rodriguez, the young man Bianca had dismissed and humiliated, was probably watching the news coverage of her downfall and feeling vindicated. Bianca pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Pearl's number. But when she tried to call, it went straight to voicemail. "This is Pearl. I'm not available right now, but if this is important, you know how to find me." The message felt like a door closing. Bianca tried texting, "Pearl, please call me. I need to know you're okay." The response came immediately, "I'm staying with friends tonight. Need some space to think. See you at 3 if you decide to go." If you decide to go. Even Pearl wasn't sure Bianca would show up. At noon, Bianca stood in front of her closet, staring at clothes that had been carefully chosen to project power, success, and authority. But Jaden had said to dress for community service. She pulled out items she'd forgotten she owned: jeans from a charity event photo shoot, a plain sweater Pearl had given her last Christmas, comfortable shoes she'd bought for a corporate retreat and never worn again. As she dressed in clothes that made her look like someone's mother instead of someone's CEO, Bianca caught sight of herself in the mirror. For the first time in years, she looked human. At 2:30 p.m., Bianca sat in her car outside the Wellington Youth Development Center, watching children play in the small playground behind the building. Their laughter carried through her closed windows, a sound of pure joy that seemed to mock the devastation of her life. Her phone buzzed with a final text from Jaden, "Mrs. Ashford. The choice you make in the next 30 minutes will determine not just your future, but the future of everyone whose life you've touched. Choose wisely." Bianca stared at the message, then at the building where her fate would be decided. She thought about Richard's warning, about Rebecca's resignation, about Pearl's tears, about all the people she'd hurt without even realizing it. She thought about the company her great-grandfather had built, the legacy her father had entrusted to her, the future she'd promised Pearl. And she thought about the man waiting inside that building, a man who had every reason to destroy her and every justification for doing so. Bianca Ashford had 30 minutes to decide who she wanted to be. The question was whether she had the courage to become that person, even if it meant losing everything she'd thought she was. As she opened her car door and stepped onto the sidewalk, Bianca realized that the next hour would either save her soul or destroy it completely. She was no longer sure there was a difference. The Wellington Youth Development Center's main room buzzed with an energy that Bianca had never experienced. Not the calculated networking of board meetings or charity galas, but something raw and authentic that made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. 30 people filled the space, arranged in a circle of folding chairs that reminded Bianca of group therapy sessions she'd seen in movies. But as her eyes adjusted to the room's warm lighting, her blood turned to ice. She knew these faces. Mrs. Mills sat directly across from the entrance, her hands folded in her lap with the same patient dignity Bianca remembered from their brief interactions at Ashford Industries. Beside her, Sidney Martinez watched Bianca enter with eyes that held no anger, only a quiet assessment that somehow felt worse than rage. Jennifer Brooks looked up from a conversation with a young woman Bianca didn't recognize, her expression shifting from surprise to something that might have been pity. Rebecca sat near the back, her posture professional even in jeans and a sweater, as if she were taking notes for a meeting Bianca couldn't see. And in the center of it all, Jaden Wellington rose from his chair with the calm authority Bianca had witnessed on the plane, but tempered now with something that looked like genuine concern. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "Thank you for coming." Bianca's legs felt unsteady as she realized what Jaden had orchestrated. This wasn't a business meeting. It wasn't even a test. It was a reckoning. "I don't understand," Bianca said, though she was beginning to understand perfectly. "You said this was about the partnership." "It is." Jaden gestured to an empty chair positioned to face the circle. "Please, sit." As Bianca moved toward the chair, she caught sight of Pearl sitting near the window, her face a mask of controlled emotion that Bianca recognized as her daughter's way of preparing for something painful but necessary. "Pearl." Bianca's voice cracked. "How long have you been here?" "About an hour," Pearl said quietly. "Jaden called me this morning. We've been talking." Bianca felt the last of her control slipping away. "About what?" Jaden stepped forward, and Bianca saw in his expression the same calm determination that had characterized every interaction they'd had since the plane. "Mrs. Ashford, every person in this room has been affected by decisions you've made or attitudes you've expressed. Some of them have worked for your company. Some have worked with your company. Some have simply existed in your orbit long enough to experience the impact of unconscious bias." Bianca sank into the designated chair, feeling like a defendant facing judgment. "Jaden, whatever you think you know." I know that Mrs. Mills designed the security protocols that saved your company $2 million in prevented theft, but you credited the achievement to her white male supervisor. Jaden's voice remained steady, factual. I know that Sidney Martinez spent 14 years maintaining your facilities without a single safety violation, but you fired him over a misunderstanding you never bothered to investigate. Each revelation hit Bianca like a physical blow. Around the circle, she could see other faces, other stories waiting to be told. I know that Rebecca has been running strategic operations for your company while you paid her an assistant's salary and introduced her to clients as my girl Rebecca. Jaden paused, his eyes finding Bianca's. And I know that 3 years ago, you humiliated a 16-year-old boy at a charity event, assuming he was service staff based solely on his appearance. Bianca's eyes found Pearl, who was crying silently. Jaden Rodriguez is my godson, Jaden continued. His father was my mentor when I started at Meridian. When Jaden told me about that night, about how ashamed Pearl looked, about how he pretended it didn't hurt so she wouldn't feel worse, that's when I realized the Ashford Industries partnership might be more than a business decision. The room fell silent except for the sound of Bianca's ragged breathing. She looked around the circle at faces that represented 20 years of unconscious cruelty, of privilege exercised without thought for its consequences. What do you want from me? She whispered. Jaden sat down across from her, his posture open but serious. I want you to listen. Each person here has a story about how your actions affected their life. Some of these stories have happy endings, people who overcame the obstacles you inadvertently created. Others. He glanced at Mrs. Mills, whose engineering career had stagnated after leaving Ashford Industries. Others are still working to rebuild what was damaged. Bianca felt the weight of every decision, every assumption, every careless word pressing down on her chest. And then what? After I listen to how terrible I am, what happens? Then you choose, Jaden said simply. Choose what? Jaden pulled out a tablet and showed Bianca a contract. Even from a distance, she could see the Meridian Airlines letterhead, the dollar amounts that could save her company, the signature lines that represented salvation. I'm prepared to offer Ashford Industries the infrastructure partnership. Full contract, $3 billion over 5 years. Enough to save your company, pay your debts, and secure your family's legacy. Bianca's heart leaped. Jaden, But, he continued, his voice cutting through her relief, there are conditions. The word hung in the air like a sword. Bianca waited. The contract requires a public apology. Not a PR statement written by your lawyers, but a genuine acknowledgement of the harm you've caused. You'll need to address the pattern of discrimination that led to yesterday's incident. Bianca felt her chest tighten. A public apology would be humiliating, but manageable. She'd survived worse. You'll also need to step down as CEO of Ashford Industries. The words hit like a physical blow. What? The contract specifies that Meridian will only partner with Ashford Industries under new leadership. You can remain as a board member, but operational control passes to someone else. Bianca's mind raced. Step down from the company her family had built? Admit that she was unfit to lead the legacy her father had entrusted to her? Who would run the company? She asked, though she suspected she knew. Jaden's slight smile confirmed her fears. Rebecca has already agreed to consider the position. She has the experience, the vision, and the credibility with both our companies. Bianca turned to look at Rebecca, who met her eyes with a mixture of apology and determination. Rebecca. Bianca's voice was barely a whisper. Mrs. Ashford, Rebecca said gently, I love this company, but I can't work for someone who doesn't see me as an equal partner in its success. Bianca felt her world reshaping around her. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd believed about herself, everything she'd promised Pearl, it was all slipping away. And if I refuse? She asked. Jaden's expression didn't change. Then there's no deal. Ashford Industries files for bankruptcy. The assets are liquidated. Your employees lose their jobs. Your family's legacy ends with you. The choice crystallized with devastating clarity. Save the company by admitting she was unfit to run it, or preserve her pride while watching everything her family had built crumble into nothing. There's one more condition, Jaden said quietly. Bianca's laugh was hollow. Of course there is. You have to convince this room that you understand why these changes are necessary. Not that you're sorry you got caught, but that you genuinely comprehend the impact of your actions and the importance of changing how business gets done. Bianca looked around the circle again, seeing each face with new clarity. These weren't abstract victims of her unconscious bias. They were people whose lives had been shaped by her failures to see them fully. Mrs. Mills, whose brilliant mind had been undervalued. Sydney, whose loyalty had been rewarded with suspicion. Jennifer, whose expertise had been diminished by casual racism. Rebecca, whose contributions had been invisible because Bianca couldn't imagine her as anything more than an assistant. And Pearl, whose love for her mother had been tested by years of watching her fail to live up to her unstated values. How long do I have to decide? Bianca asked. Jaden checked his watch. The contract expires at 5 p.m. That's 90 minutes. Bianca closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 4 generations of Ashford ambition pressing down on her shoulders. When she opened them, Pearl was watching her with an expression of such hopeful pain that Bianca's heart nearly broke. "Mom," Pearl said softly, "what would great-grandfather do?" The question pierced through Bianca's defenses like nothing else could have. She thought about the stories her father had told her, how his grandfather had mortgaged everything to pay workers during the Depression, how he'd integrated the company decades before it was legally required, how he'd built success on the principle that business should serve humanity, not the other way around. Bianca looked at Jaden, then at the circle of faces waiting for her decision. For the first time in her life, she understood that some choices could only be made by losing everything you thought you wanted to become everything you were meant to be. "I need to make a phone call," she said quietly. As Bianca stepped outside to dial Richard Patterson's number, she realized she was about to make a decision that would either destroy her completely or save her in ways she was only beginning to understand. The question was no longer whether she had the courage to face the truth about herself. The question was whether she had the courage to become someone better. Bianca's phone call to Richard Patterson lasted exactly 90 seconds, long enough to destroy a lifetime of expectations and short enough to still leave time for courage. "Richard," she'd said, standing outside the community center with Chicago's autumn wind cutting through her sweater. "I'm about to do something that will probably end my career." "Bianca, whatever Jaden Wellington is asking you to do. He's asking me to tell the truth. About myself. About what I've done to people." Bianca had watched through the window as Pearl sat in the circle, her hands folded in her lap like a prayer. "And I think I'm going to do it." Richard's silence stretched across the phone line like a chasm. "The company will survive," Bianca had continued, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "But it might survive without me." "Bianca, I love you, Richard. Thank you for everything." Now, walking back into the community center, Bianca felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood. The terrifying, exhilarating freedom of not knowing what came next. Jaden looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Ashford." Bianca returned to her chair in the center of the circle, but this time she didn't sit. Instead, she stood facing the group, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "I've spent the last 24 hours trying to figure out how to save my reputation, my company, my life as I know it," she began. "But sitting here, looking at all of you, I realize I've been asking the wrong question." She turned to Mrs. Mills. "The question isn't how to save what I've built. The question is whether what I've built was worth saving." Mrs. Mills's expression softened slightly, but she remained silent. Bianca continued, her voice gaining strength. "Mrs. Mills, you designed security protocols that revolutionized our entire industry. But I gave credit to your supervisor because I couldn't imagine that the quiet woman in the corner office was the brilliant mind behind the innovation. I robbed you of recognition because I saw what I expected to see, not what was actually there." She turned to Sydney Martinez. "Sydney, you maintained our facilities for 14 years. You made our buildings safe, efficient, and welcoming. When equipment went missing, I immediately suspected you. Not because of any evidence, but because it was easier to blame the maintenance worker than to consider that my precious executive team might have made a mistake." Sydney nodded slightly, his eyes reflecting a pain that Bianca was finally allowing herself to see. "Jennifer," Bianca continued, turning to the marketing executive, "I introduced you to clients as my diversity hire, thinking I was showing how progressive we were. I never realized I was undermining your credibility, making every success you achieved seem like charity rather than merit." Bianca's voice broke slightly as she faced Rebecca. "And Rebecca, God, Rebecca, you've been running half my company for 3 years while I paid you a fraction of what you were worth and treated you like my personal assistant. You have an MBA from Northwestern, you speak 3 languages, and you've saved us from more disasters than I can count. But I never promoted you because I couldn't see past my own assumptions about who you were." The room was silent except for the sound of Bianca's increasingly ragged breathing. But she wasn't finished. The worst part, Bianca said, her voice barely above a whisper, is that I thought I was a good person. I donated to charities. I voted for the right candidates. I hired diverse staff. I told myself that made me progressive, enlightened, better than my parents' generation. She laughed bitterly. But charity isn't the same as justice. Diversity isn't the same as equity. And good intentions don't erase harmful impact. Bianca turned to Pearl, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Pearl, you tried to teach me these things for years. You brought home friends like Jaden Rodriguez, hoping I'd see them as people rather than stereotypes. You volunteered at homeless shelters and immigrant resource centers, trying to show me what real justice looked like. You chose Colombia's social justice program because you were terrified of becoming like me. Pearl was crying now too, but she nodded for Bianca to continue. I failed you, Bianca said simply. I failed all of you. Not just yesterday on that plane, but for years. Decades. I used my privilege as a weapon without even realizing I was holding it. Bianca sat down heavily, her energy depleted by the weight of truth-telling. So here's what I'm going to do, she said, looking directly at Jaden. I'm accepting your offer. All of it. The public apology, the partnership, my resignation as CEO. Jaden raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Ashford. I'm not finished. Bianca's voice carried a new authority, not the authority of position or wealth, but the authority of someone who had finally found their truth. Rebecca, I'm recommending you as my replacement. Not because Jaden suggested it, but because you've earned it 10 times over. You understand this company better than I do, and you understand how to lead without leaving people behind. Rebecca's eyes widened. Mrs. Ashford, I don't know what to say. Say you'll take the job, Bianca replied. Say you'll build the company that my great-grandfather envisioned, one that serves people rather than exploiting them. Bianca stood again, addressing the entire circle. I can't undo the harm I've caused. I can't give back the opportunities one denied you or erase the pain of being dismissed and undervalued. But I can step aside and create space for leaders who see clearly what I was blind to. The silence that followed felt different, not the hostile quiet of judgment, but the contemplative silence of people processing a transformation they hadn't expected to witness. Jaden stood slowly, his expression thoughtful. Mrs. Ashford, I have a confession to make. Bianca felt her stomach drop. What kind of confession? Jaden glanced at Pearl, who nodded almost imperceptibly. This intervention, it wasn't entirely my idea. Bianca felt the room shifting around her again, reality rearranging itself into a new configuration. What do you mean? Pearl stood up, her face flushed but determined. Mom, I reached out to Jaden 3 months ago. The words hit Bianca like a physical blow. You what? After the Jaden Rodriguez incident, I started researching Jaden Wellington. I found out about his mentorship programs, his commitment to equity in business. I wrote to him, told him about our family's company, about the partnership you were pursuing. Bianca stared at her daughter, trying to process this new information. Pearl, what did you do? I asked him to help me save you from yourself. The confession hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Bianca felt everything she thought she understood about the last 24 hours crumbling. The video from the plane, Jaden said gently. It was always going to go viral. But Pearl asked me to use this crisis as an opportunity to create the intervention you needed. Bianca's legs gave out, and she sank back into her chair. You orchestrated all of this. Not the racism, Mom, Pearl said quickly. That was all you. But the response, the consequences, the chance to choose differently, that was us working together to give you what you needed. Jaden stepped forward. Mrs. Ashford, your daughter loves you enough to risk your anger to save your soul. She spent months convincing me that underneath your unconscious bias was a woman capable of growth. Bianca looked around the circle, seeing everything with new eyes. How many of you knew? Mrs. Mills raised her hand. I reached out to Pearl after I saw the news coverage. I wanted to tell my story. Sydney nodded. Same here. Your daughter made it possible for us to be heard. Jennifer smiled sadly. Pearl called me last week. Said her mother needed to understand the impact of her words. Bianca turned to Rebecca, who was crying openly now. Did you know? I knew Pearl was trying to help you, Rebecca said softly. I didn't know if you were capable of being helped. Bianca felt something breaking apart in her chest, not her heart, but the armor around it. For 24 hours, She'd seen herself as the victim of circumstances beyond her control. Now she understood that her daughter had loved her enough to orchestrate her own humiliation if it meant creating space for transformation. "Pearl," Bianca whispered, "I could have chosen to walk away. I could have filed for bankruptcy, blamed everyone else, learned nothing." "I know," Pearl said simply. "That's what made it a real choice." Jaden sat back down, his expression gentler than Bianca had seen since the airplane. "Mrs. Ashford, the contract I showed you is real. The partnership offer is genuine. But it was never contingent on your resignation." Bianca felt the world shift again. What? The only real requirement was this conversation. The willingness to face the harm you've caused and commit to doing better. Jaden smiled. "Your decision to step down voluntarily tells me everything I need to know about your capacity for growth. So the partnership is yours, if you want it. Under your leadership, with Rebecca as Chief Operating Officer, with the understanding that Ashford Industries becomes a model for equitable business practices." Bianca looked around the circle at faces that no longer seemed hostile, but hopeful. She thought about her great-grandfather, who had built something meaningful from nothing. She thought about her father, who had trusted her with a legacy she'd nearly destroyed. She thought about Pearl, who had loved her enough to risk everything to save her. "I still want Rebecca to be CEO," Bianca said finally. "But I'd like to stay on as whatever role she thinks I can be trusted with." Rebecca stood up, walked across the circle, and extended her hand to Bianca. "How about co-CEO?" Rebecca said with a smile. "I think Ashford Industries could use both of our perspectives." As Bianca took Rebecca's hand, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of becoming someone better than she'd been. The circle erupted in applause, but Bianca only had eyes for Pearl, who was crossing the room with her arms open. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Pearl whispered as they embraced. "I'm finally proud to be your daughter." Bianca held her daughter close, understanding for the first time that love wasn't just about protection and provision. It was about the courage to help someone become their best self, even when that transformation required destroying who they used to be. As the group began to disperse, Jaden approached Bianca one final time. "Mrs. Ashford, there's one more thing Pearl asked me to tell you." Bianca looked up, wondering what other revelations awaited her. "Your great-grandfather, the one who founded the company, he faced his own reckoning about bias and prejudice in 1943. There's a letter in your family's papers, written to your grandfather, where he admits to discriminatory hiring practices and commits to changing how the company operated." Bianca's eyes widened. "I never knew that." "Pearl found it while researching your family history. She wanted you to know that transformation isn't a failure of your legacy, it's the continuation of it." As Bianca walked out of the Wellington Youth Development Center with Pearl's hand in hers, she realized that she'd entered the building as the CEO of a failing company and a failing person. She was leaving as something else entirely, a woman who had lost everything she thought she wanted and found everything she actually needed. The Ashford Industries that would emerge from this crisis wouldn't just be financially successful. It would be worthy of the name it carried and the people it served. And Bianca Ashford would spend the rest of her life proving that even the most unconscious bias could be transformed into conscious justice, one relationship, one decision, one courageous conversation at a time. 6 months later, Bianca Ashford stood at the departure gate of Chicago O'Hare Airport, watching passengers board Flight 892 to Detroit. But this time, she wasn't the passenger, she was the one saying goodbye. Pearl adjusted her carry-on bag, her eyes bright with excitement and nervous energy. At 21, she'd made the difficult decision to take a gap year from Columbia to work as a program coordinator at the Wellington Youth Development Center, despite Bianca's initial protests. "You sure about this, sweetheart?" Bianca asked, though she already knew the answer. "Mom, you spent 4 to 7 years learning that privilege without purpose is just expensive emptiness. I'm not waiting that long." Pearl smiled, the kind of radiant expression that reminded Bianca why all the pain of transformation had been worth it. "Besides, Jaden says I have a good eye for seeing potential where others see problems. Wonder where I got that from." Bianca laughed, remembering her own words to Jaden 6 months ago. "I think that's called hope, Pearl. And yes, you definitely got that from the Ashford side of the family." Their relationship had transformed in ways Bianca never could have imagined. The daughter who'd once been ashamed to share her last name now wore it proudly, knowing it represented not perfection, but the courage to grow. Their weekly dinners had evolved from obligatory check-ins to genuine conversations about justice, business, and the complexities of changing generational patterns. "Mrs. Ashford." Bianca turned to see Maya, the flight attendant from that fateful flight 6 months ago, approaching with a warm smile. She was out of uniform, traveling as a passenger, but Bianca recognized her immediately. Maya, how wonderful to see you. I wanted to thank you, Maya said, extending her hand. The scholarship program you and Mr. Wellington created, my little sister just got accepted. She's going to study aerospace engineering. Bianca felt the familiar warmth that had become her favorite emotion, the deep satisfaction of using privilege to create opportunity rather than maintaining barriers. The Ashford Meridian Youth Aviation Program had been one of the first initiatives launched after the partnership was finalized. What had started as Bianca's clumsy attempt at penance had evolved into a comprehensive program that provided scholarships, mentoring, and career pathways for underrepresented students interested in aviation and aerospace. Maya, that's wonderful. Is she excited? Terrified and thrilled, Maya laughed. Just like you looked 6 months ago. As Maya continued toward her gate, Bianca reflected on how different she felt from the woman who'd made assumptions about Jaden's belonging in first class. The board seats, the executive privileges, the deference that had once seemed so important, none of it had disappeared, but all of it had been recontextualized. Power, Bianca had learned, was only meaningful when it was shared. Mom, I need to board, Pearl said, glancing at the gate display. Bianca hugged her daughter, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the faint smell of the coffee they'd shared an hour earlier. Call me when you land. And Pearl. Yeah. Thank you. For loving me enough to break me down so I could build myself back up. Pearl's eyes filled with tears. That's what family does, Mom. We don't give up on each other, even when giving up would be easier. Federal contract led to actual cheering. And when Richard Patterson stood to address the room, Bianca braced herself for criticism but received something unexpected. Bianca, Richard said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of friendship. 6 months ago, I thought you were destroying everything your father built. I was wrong. You were rebuilding it on a foundation strong enough to last another century. As the meeting concluded and board members filed out, Bianca found herself alone with Richard for the first time since her transformation began. Richard, I owe you an apology too. For what? For making you choose between loyalty to me and loyalty to your principles. That wasn't fair. Richard smiled sadly. Bianca, do you want to know the real reason I was so angry about your changes? Bianca nodded. Because they forced me to confront my own assumptions. If you could transform so completely, what did that say about the rest of us who'd been comfortable with the status quo? Bianca felt a familiar pang of recognition. Growth, she'd learned, was often as threatening to observers as it was liberating for those who experienced it. Richard, transformation isn't a judgment of who you used to be. It's an invitation to become who you're meant to be. As evening settled over Chicago, Bianca walked through the Ashford Industries offices, observing the changes that had become the new normal. The diverse faces in the executive corridor. The employee resource groups meeting in conference rooms. The mentorship programs that paired senior executives with junior staff across traditional hierarchical lines. In the lobby, she paused at the memorial wall dedicated to her father and great-grandfather, where their portraits hung alongside quotes about their business philosophy. A new addition caught her eye, a plaque installed by the Employee Council that read, "Excellence is not about being better than others. It's about being better than you used to be." Outside, Bianca's driver was waiting, Sydney Martinez, who'd returned to the company not as maintenance staff but as head of facilities and environmental sustainability, a role that utilized both his practical knowledge and his newly completed business degree. Evening, Mrs. Ashford. How was the board meeting? Transformative, Sydney. Just like everything else around here lately. Sydney smiled in the rearview mirror. My wife says the same thing about our dinner conversations. Apparently, getting fired and then rehired as an executive makes for interesting pillow talk. Bianca laughed, remembering her own conversation with Pearl about how change rippled outward in ways that couldn't be predicted or controlled. At home, Bianca found her penthouse apartment transformed as well. Where once she'd displayed awards and accolades, she now showcased photographs from the community programs she'd become involved with. Pictures of scholarship recipients, employee families at company picnics, and candid shots from the monthly listening circles where staff shared their experiences and suggestions. Her phone buzzed with a video call from Pearl. Mom, you have to see this. Pearl's face appeared on screen, bright with excitement, standing in what looked like an airplane hangar filled with teenagers and complex machinery. We just finished our first prototype for the youth aviation program. Mom, these kids designed and built a working drone that can deliver medical supplies to remote areas. Jaden says it's innovative enough to patent. Bianca felt tears gathering in her eyes. Pearl, that's incredible. But here's the best part. Remember Jaden Rodriguez? The boy from the charity gala. Bianca's breath caught. Of course. He's leading the engineering team. Mom, the kid you tried to send to the kitchen is designing aircraft that could save lives. The irony was perfect and painful and beautiful all at once. Bianca thought about the countless ripple effects of bias and privilege, how many innovations had been lost because talent was dismissed based on appearance, accent, or assumption. Pearl, tell Jaden I said hello. And that I'm sorry. And that I'm proud of him. I will. But Mom, he already knows. He told me that sometimes the people who hurt us become the people who teach us the most about forgiveness. After Pearl hung up, Bianca sat in her living room overlooking Lake Michigan, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink that no longer seemed to mock her circumstances but instead celebrated them. Her phone chimed with one final message of the day, from Jaden Wellington. Bianca, I thought you should know, the video from our plane encounter is being used in business schools as a case study in crisis transformation. Not the viral part, but what happened after. Students are studying how authentic accountability can transform corporate culture. Your story is teaching the next generation of leaders that change is possible. Bianca smiled, understanding that her worst moment had indeed become the catalyst for her best transformation. She thought about the woman who'd boarded Flight 4477 6 months ago, entitled, unconsciously biased, wrapped in privilege she'd never examined. That woman was gone, not erased but evolved into someone who understood that true power came from lifting others rather than standing on their shoulders. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More difficult conversations. More opportunities to choose growth over comfort. The work of transformation was never complete. It was a daily commitment to seeing clearly, acting justly, and building bridges rather than barriers. But tonight, Bianca Ashford was exactly who she was meant to be. A woman who'd lost everything she thought she wanted and found everything she actually needed. A mother her daughter was proud to claim. A leader her employees respected and trusted. A human being who'd learned that redemption wasn't about returning to who you used to be. It was about becoming who you were always capable of becoming. As she prepared for bed, Bianca caught sight of herself in the mirror and smiled. For the first time in her life, she looked at her reflection and saw not what she'd accomplished, but what she'd overcome. And tomorrow, she'd wake up ready to do it all over again. Because that's what transformation really meant. Not a single moment of change, but a lifetime commitment to choosing growth over comfort, truth over convenience, and love over fear. The Ashford legacy would continue, stronger than ever, built on a foundation of justice rather than just success. And Bianca Ashford would spend the rest of her life proving that even the most unconscious bias could be transformed into conscious justice, one relationship, one decision, one courageous conversation at a time. What did this story teach you about the power of authentic accountability and the courage required for genuine transformation? Sometimes our worst moments become the doorways to our best selves, but only if we're willing to walk through them with honesty, humility, and hope. Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world.